Shanti. Om peace. Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradhidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vradavarshini Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manasantadham Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini Yam Brahma Varinendra Dramarudastunnanjadi Vaistavai Vede Sangapadakramopanisadai Gayantiyam Samaga Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyantiyam Yogiyam Brahma Yasyandam Navidusura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Sangapadakramopanisadai. So as you know, we were discussing the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is a condensation of all the fundamental teachings of Vedanta or Indian philosophy or Hindu philosophy. And we were discussing the verses from 7th to 10th. That's what we're discussing. So in these verses, you find a very interesting description of the fundamental essential characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. That's an interesting thing. 20 important characteristics necessary for spiritual enlightenment are given here. In none of these verses, surprisingly, you come across the idea of praying to a god, or going to a church or a temple, or reading a book or performing a ritual on a regular basis. Of course, that these are very important and very necessary for this purpose. But in these verses, Lord Krishna, the teacher of Gita, never mentions any of them. Rather, if you look at this list of 20 characteristics, that which are the characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. What do you come across? A person, an individual who is broad-minded, compassionate, wise, intelligent, self-restrained. In fact, an individual who has perfect control over his mind and senses. This is all about spirituality. So it begins with the 7th verse. As you know, most of you must have already listened to the previous classes, and those of you are coming and attending these classes for the first time, you can listen to the previous classes. It begins with Amanittum Adambittum Ahimsa Kshantihi Arjavam Acharyopasanam Shaujam Sthairyam Atma Vinigraha Indriyartheshu Vairagyam Anahangara Evacha Janma Mritu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshani Darshanam Asaktihi Anabhishwanga Putradara Grihadishu Nityam Cha Samachittatum Ishtanishtopavattishu Maicha Ananya Yogena Bhakti Ravibijarini Vivikta Desha Sevitum Anabhirjana Samsati. This 20 characteristics. Put in English, let's say. First of all, humility. Humility in the sense, it doesn't mean weakness or effeminacy or a kind of self-deprecating attitude. What it means is, we should be proud of our skills, but we should also know that others also may have the same skills, the same merits. So that will make us self-restrained in our own expression of our skills or our talents. So that will make us a bit self-restrained. So self-restraint is a natural characteristic of any spiritual person. As I mentioned on earlier occasions, even a casual reading of a great book on spirituality and philosophy can at least for some time give us a sense of moderation and self-restraint. So in the scriptural, in the commentaries on the Gita, you find amanittum or humility as it's frequently translated, simple translation. It means the ability to respect others and not having a very high opinion of ourselves. These two characteristics are mentioned in the scriptures, in the commentaries, as constituting this particular Sanskrit word amanittu. Literally means not having a very high opinion about ourselves, but respecting other people for their virtues. And then unpretentiousness, not being pretentious, non-violence or what you call ahimsa, forbearance, uprightness, service to the, humility and service to the tradition, teachers, and purity, mental purity, purity of thought, words and actions, and steadiness, self-control. These are the characteristics. And then these are the 9 characteristics in the list. And then a sense of renunciation, of extreme obsessive attachment to things and persons or individuals. Attachment is certainly good in the form of love, affection or understanding or friendship, but when it becomes a kind of obsession, obsessive attachment, it becomes a chain that binds us. So we should have compassion for everyone. At the same time, it should be a kind of compassion with a degree of detachment. So that's the idea began. Under normal circumstances, when we don't have this compassion for others or good feeling towards others, without some higher ideal behind, that friendship with others will always go along with hostility to somebody else. So likes and dislikes, they go together. When we have very friendly with somebody, it may be one expression of our hostility towards others. So when we can have the one without the other, when we can be friendly with others without being hostile to some others, that is what is called a kind of, indriyartheshu vairagyam. Of course, here the reference is with regards to objects of enjoyment. And then absence of egoism, indriyartheshu vairagyam, anahankara evacha, janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarsana. It's a very interesting we will discuss. We already discussed the previous classes. Reflection on the evils of janma mrityu jara vyadhi. Janma means birth, mrityu means death, jara means old age, vyadhi means sickness, etc. Now, here what it is, dukkha doshanudarsanam, and we should always reflect on these problems. This is the literal meaning. What it means is, when we keep in mind that this body, all the senses of enjoyment, objects of sense enjoyments, wealth, all the great things, good things of enjoyment, accumulation of wealth, great name, all these are certainly good, but we should also remember that they are not eternal. So that's why certain problems of the human body are mentioned here. Janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi. Janma means birth. Birth is an event, and it will be followed by death after 100 years. We may live in this world for 100 years. So the possibility of our going away from this world, that this physical body, this embodiment itself is not the highest thing that we should think of. There is something far beyond, something transcendental, something much higher than this physical body or this body-mind complex. Values, truth, all these great values, spirituality, meditation, all these will help us to understand, though this body is the wonderful instrument, the body by itself is only an entity, something that one day will disappear. So it goes through this cyclic processes of falling sick, getting old, and slowly body decays and disappears. Now, it doesn't mean that we should have a negative outlook towards life. What it means, when we think too much about our youth and beauty and strength and power and wealth and all the wonderful things, then we should remind ourselves, these things are not going to be there for all time. One day, maybe after 100 years, this body won't be there. This wealth won't be ours. This house will not be ours. Now, that doesn't mean that we should throw this away or give up and go to a forest. Not at all. But excessive attachment, which creates problems of jealousy, rivalry, sleepless nights, anxieties, and then even you may be a billionaire, but if you lose $1 million, it makes us sleepless for days, for years. That's absolutely meaningless, because this wealth is anyway bound to disappear one day. Body, health, everything is bound to change. The human body is bound to go through these changes of old age and sickness sometimes, and of course death. So this is an important thing. We should always remember Vedanta helps us to develop a kind of spiritual level-headedness, kind of spiritual common sense, a spiritual wisdom. In a simple sense, a mature outlook towards life as a whole. That's all. And that will actually help us to live better. That will help us to live better. The realization of the transient nature of worldly objects, worldly things, actually helps us to enjoy things of this world in a more intelligent manner, in a much more healthy manner. That's the idea behind. So that's why, and the anudarsana means we should constantly remind ourselves when we become sleepless because we are lost and $1,000, we may have billions of dollars in the bank, still it becomes a cause of anxiety and worry. Then we should remember, this money is not going to be there all the time. Also minor health problems sometimes in many people, even 90-year-old, 85-year-old people, somehow there is a nagging, a hidden expectation that we should always remain youthful, beautiful, healthy all the time. This you can find even among people who are 90 years, 80 years and so on. Physically it is impossible, everyone knows, but there is a nagging desire that makes us wish, if only I could remain in the same state of health and youth for all time. It never happens, it cannot happen. So this again should not make us depressed or worried. Rather, it will help us to live life in a more intelligent and in a wiser manner, in a more mature, develop a mature outlook towards life as a whole. That's why all these are listed here. So this 12th characteristic is Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darsanam. Reminding ourselves when we lose sleep over the loss of some tiny, transient, worthless, worldly objects of enjoyment. Remember, these things are not bound to remain the same all the time. Then asaktihi anabhishanga putradara grihadishu nityam samachituttam ishtanishtopavattishu. Mean non-attachment, non-identification with one's own dear and near ones, and hating everyone else. That kind of obsessive infatuation for persons or individuals, that also can be a cause of worries. So that's something. Again, a kind of even-mindedness, and again remaining the same, either in a state of happiness or unhappiness. In pain and pleasure, we should be able to keep our mind in a state of equilibrium, in even-mindedness. And then the 6th, 7th and 8th Maicha Aninyayogena Bhaktirha Vibhijarini Vivikta Desha Savitam and Abhirjana Samsadi. In the previous class, I very elaborately explained the importance of this particular verse, because it is the first statement in world religious literature which tells us that the highest devotion to a god in a temple or a church where you go and pray, and also the highest spiritual philosophical wisdom are the same. Prayers, meditations, all these are meant to help us to develop this spiritual wisdom. I mean, the understanding of the unity and oneness of existence, the unity and oneness of humanity. When we realize that the whole humanity is one spiritual family, not only human beings, the entire creation is one spiritual family. So this idea of oneness and unity of existence, this is Advaita as we call in Vedantic tradition, and the highest devotion. It both will take us to the same level of spiritual enlightenment. This is an important thing. That's why Lord Krishna never includes in this list of characteristics the idea of prayer or meditation or worship or anything. Because if you can develop all these characteristics, then naturally you will be able to feel the presence of God not only inside the temple but also outside the temple. You will be able to feel the presence of God when you are working in an office. If I got these characteristics, even-mindedness, purity, looking upon whole humanity as one spiritual family, doing everything as an offering to the divine. If we can do that, whether we are working in an office, in a factory, or in the field, in the farm, wherever it is the same thing as worshipping God in a temple or a church, no difference. This is the great idea of this 10th verse. But the second half of this verse, see, Vivikta Desha Sevitam Aratihi Jana Samsadi. What it means is, one should develop an inclination to stay in isolated places, sequestered places. It means where places, rather the ability to enjoy a state of mind when you are left alone. I mean, the ability to enjoy and appreciate loneliness. Now, loneliness is frequently a very unpleasant term. Being alone. The ability to enjoy being alone. There's a great importance attached to this verse by many commentators. One important reason, many of the traditional commentators, they emphasize the idea that when you are alone, somewhere in a park or on the top of a mountain, then our mind puts before us a mirror. We will start thinking of all the words that we speak, all the things that we do. We are able to observe ourselves as a witness. We will be able to observe and analyze our own emotions, our own feelings, our anger, our jealousies, our hatred, our infatuations. In fact, it places a mirror right in front of our mind. So that's why Lord Krishna uses a very important term, Vivikta Desha Sevitam Aratihi Jana Samsati. That means is developing an inclination, a taste for enjoying being left alone or enjoying a state of loneliness. Not loneliness in its negative sense, rather, but if you are lonely, it is sometimes very unpleasant experience, unpleasant feeling comes. But when we are alone, you need not necessarily lonely. When we are alone, when we think of our actions, it helps us to detach our self, capital letter S, from ourselves, and we become our own witnesses. We start witnessing, we start observing our own feelings and emotions and all this. And that can be the beginning of spiritual journey. That's what you find. Of course, I frequently quote the one interesting book. Frequently I refer to. It's not necessarily a religious book. Thoreau's Walden. This man walking, traveling in lonely places, forest and mountains, and what all thoughts come to his mind. If you read in Walden, you find. So, great thoughts, higher thoughts. This is an example. He was not a sage or a saint or a philosopher to begin with, but he had the unique ability to enjoy being left alone in the company of woods, ponds, waters, rivers and valleys. So, in fact, this is a discipline. The ability to enjoy being left alone, not in negative sense of being lonely because it's a state of mind. Rather, when we sit, when we withdraw ourselves to a lonely place and think and reflect on our own life, sometimes that can be the beginning of a spiritual journey. One could practice this every day or once a week for a few minutes. That can give a quantum leap in our own spiritual, our own emotional evolution. We become more mature, higher perspective. That's why Lord Krishna includes this as the 18th characteristic of, these are disciplines one should follow. Disciplines. So, again, of course, all great thoughts and ideas emerge from persons who enjoyed being left alone. It doesn't mean that they were not sociable or they hated, they didn't like other people's company. Not in that sense, but being left alone is a natural characteristic of philosophers, thinkers, especially during the early phase of the spiritual evolution. Later on, of course, Swami Vivekananda says on one occasion when he came to San Francisco, Swami Vivekananda said, the founder of this Vedanta society, 1900, he says, if you can think of the highest, if you can feel, if you can connect with the unity and oneness of existence, even standing in the middle of the Market Street in San Francisco, there's an interesting statement. You can find a statement in our website. If you can stand in the middle of San Francisco Market Street and be contemplative inwardly, that's the highest state of mind. But before reaching that state, we have to start practicing this discipline of enjoying being left alone. That's why you find many of the great teachers, Buddha, of course he went to Bodh Gaya and sat under the tree for years. He meditated and contemplated. That's why, because he wanted to reach the spiritual enlightenment by practicing spiritual disciplines, including enjoying state of being left alone, being alone or aloneness, so to speak. You find Jesus Christ also left somewhere and he left the company, and for many days he practiced austerity. You can find this in the lives of many great spiritual teachers. Only not after they have reached spiritual enlightenment, but before, as a discipline. And then the other characteristics are given, 19th and 20th. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam, tattva jnanartha darshanam, edo jnanamiti proktam ajnanam yadato anyatha. Constant reflection or contemplation on spiritual knowledge. Somehow attaching ourselves to some higher thought. Along with all other professions and engagements and activities, if we can spend every day a few minutes at least to thinking higher thoughts, maybe by reading, maybe by associating with people and discussing higher spiritual ideas, or visiting places where spiritual ideas are discussed. So this will help us slowly to evolve and reach the final stage of spiritual enlightenment. That state is called Kshetrajna state. And then Tattwajnanartha darshanam, realizing the ultimate purpose of knowledge. This is called the real knowledge. This is the truth. This is the 11th verse of this text. Now, after this, you can find a description of the all-pervading nature of God. Means God, in the most sublime definition of God idea, is not a person who sits outside of us. God is one omnipresent, all-pervading reality, spiritual truth that is present in all of us as the divine light. That is the conclusion of the next discussion. So there Lord Krishna says in this 12th verse, he says, for example, Yeyam yattat pravakshami yajñātva amrudamasnute anādimat param brahma natsat tannasaduchyate. So now I am going to describe, I am going to explain to you that which is the ultimate truth to be known. What is to be known? Along with all other branches of learning, which will bring us a lot of comforts and power, many things, there is something much higher than all this, which is to be known. And it is that knowledge that will help us to become spiritually enlightenment. Anādimat param brahma nasat nasaduchyate. And that absolute reality, the supreme Brahman, it is called as neither being nor non-being. Now this is a verse that requires some philosophical contemplation, philosophical discussion. Now, what is that to be known? What is to be known is the divine truth that is present everywhere, that is present in everything. This is a state of spiritual evolution that we will ultimately reach as a result of our spiritual growth. During the early stages of our life, we have to perform rituals, going to places of worship, reading books, reading prayers, meditation, and so on. But the ultimate purpose of all this is to realize the presence of the divine, not just outside in a temple or a place of worship, but in our own hearts, and to feel that presence in whatever we do, in whatever activities we are engaged. We should always do that work, whatever may be our duty, whatever we do. The work should be done as an offering to the divine, present in all of us. This is the ultimate, this realization, this state of spiritual evolution is the ultimate goal of human life. This doesn't happen all of a sudden. It takes long preparations. But if one can do something good and noble right now and today, you will be beginning the spiritual journey. And that is called karma yoga. Doing everything we do, all our secular duties and responsibilities. Actually, there is no real line of demarcation between the secular and the spiritual. Vedanta asks us to do even the secular work as a spiritual activity. So, if we can transform our everyday secular activities, ordinary activities, work that we do, speaking, doing, talking, everything, if we can give it a spiritual orientation to whatever we do, that is the real spirituality. So spirituality is something that we practice every day, every moment in our life, all the time. So at the beginning, perhaps we may have to draw a line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual. We do work in a university or office or factory, that is secular. but we may pray in a place of worship that is spiritual. This is the beginning. But gradually, one should be able to feel the presence of the divine, not only in the place of worship or in the holy book, but also in everything, even when we are engaged in our everyday activities, whatever may be the activity. So now, before reaching that state, there are a few disciplines mentioned here. Sarvada Panivadam, Sarvada Akshishiro Mukham, Sarvada Siddhuman Loge, Sarvam Avritya Tishtadi. So this discussion continues for some time, the all-pervading nature of the divine. That divine, it's a great poetical expression. How do we express the idea that divine is present everywhere? It's one statement. So, in the language of a poet who is trying to put in words what actually you cannot explain in words. So, every spiritual poet has this problem. He is trying to put in words what actually cannot be explained or described in words. So, there is a metaphor here, Sarvada Panivadam, Sarvada Akshishiro Mukham, Sarvada Siddhiman Loge, Sarvam Avritya Tishtadi. This discussion continues. Sarvendriya Gunabhasam, Sarvendriya Vivarjidam, Asattam Sarvabhutchaiva, Nirgunam Gunabhoktricha. So you find that divine reality has hands and feet everywhere, eyes, heads and mouths everywhere, ears everywhere. This is how it continues. That means the divine is present everywhere. It is the all-pervading, the omnipresent nature. And also the fact that this divine is present in everything. So that idea is put in the language of a poet. That divine has his eyes and ears everywhere, feet and hands everywhere. Means whatever we do with our different senses of perception, different senses of action, with the mind and intellect, all these are expressions of the divine present in us all of the time. That's the idea. The physical body, the mind and intellect only constitute a tool for the manifestation of that divine that is present within us. So again he says, it is beyond the senses, but at the same time it expresses through the senses. As I used to mention earlier, when you draw a great picture, or when you sing a great song, when you write a great book, when you make a great discovery, actually it is the manifestation of the divine present within you. But at the same time, the divine is beyond all this. One may draw a great picture with his hand, a great artist. So that is an expression of the divine, the presence of the divine spark within the great artist. Especially any activity of artistic genius, literary genius, even that of a great scientist, when it exceeds the empirical dimension, when it reaches the transcendental dimension, going beyond the empirical, it is touching the border of the divine. This is transcendental. That's how a great poem is written, a great a big picture is painted, all because the great artist transcends the empirical dimension. But at the same time, that divine spark is beyond the hands of an artist who paints a picture or the vocal cords of an artist who sings a song. That song comes in, it takes birth because of the divine spark within the great musician. The great poem is written by a writer, by a poet, because the divine spark. But at the same time, the poem is different. So that's the idea, Sarvendriya Gunabhasam, Sarvendriya Vivarjidam. It is without the senses. It is unattached. It is not attached to any senses, but senses are able to function because of the divine spark within. That's the idea behind. Again, he sustained asaktam sarvam bhritchaiva nirgunam gunabhoktricha. Again, he sustains everything. It is devoid, it is beyond all the characteristics. This discussion continues. Bahirantascha bhudanam acharam charamevacha sukshmatvat tadavijneyam durastham cha antiketat. Again, this supreme reality, it is within everyone. Bahirandascha bhutanam. It is outside and inside everything. You can see the all-pervading nature of the divine. It is easy to describe God as somebody who creates this world and sits somewhere above, supervises, takes care of all of us, listens to our prayers and fulfills our prayers. Wonderful. But Vedanta accept that interpretation. But Vedanta says, when you evolve further, when you reach a higher level of spiritual evolution, then you get a more complete picture of the divine, and then you realize the divine, the God whom you are praying to in a temple, about whom you are reading in a holy book, that divine is one all-pervading spiritual principle. And that spiritual principle is present in us, present in everyone. So it is outside and inside of everything. And not only that, it is outside and inside of everything that is moving and unmoving. So the idea is behind, Even the great valleys and mountains, if you say that the divine is present in a beautiful valley or clouds, then what does it mean? Then you can't say that God is all-pervading. It's not that the clouds are God or the mountains are not at all. But all these are pervaded by the divine. I mean, the spiritual unity and oneness of creation. So that's one of the fundamental principles of Vedantic cosmology and Vedantic cosmogony. Whether you're talking about nature, the origin of the universe, or origin and evolution and development of the universe, Vedanta tells you, as we evolve further, we get a more and complete picture of the divine, and the highest state is when we realize the divine as an all-pervading reality. This idea is very powerfully mentioned in this 17th verse, which is a very, very famous verse. That's a very well-known, highly philosophical, one of the most famous. That is, Jyotisham abhita jyotihi tamasa paramuchyadi jnanam jneyam jnanagamyam hridi sarvasya vishtidam. It's a very, very famous verse. Those of you can enjoy this, very philosophical. That is the light of all lights, and it's beyond darkness. It is knowledge, is the object of knowledge, and the goal of knowledge. It is present and divine in everyone, in everything. Now, this is actually a reference to another well-known statement that appears in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you find in the 4th chapter, there is one section, a section in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is called Brahmanam. This is an interesting dialogue in which a king asks a philosopher some questions, and there is an interesting dialogue. The first question is, anyway, to give a background, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is one of the most, in a way, it is the most important and the largest of the 10 Upanishads that Shankaracharya interpreted through his commentaries. And it describes dialogue. It contains a lot of dialogues and describes the highest philosophical truths in the form of dialogues. And in the dialogues, there are some wonderful women philosophers like Gargi, Maitreyi, and so on. And also great kings. We should not imagine that all these teachers were necessarily philosophers, professional philosophers. Some of them were professional monarchs, kings, emperors. And here's an interesting dialogue. It's called the Jyoti Brahmanam, it is called. I mean, the section, the Brahmanam, that deals with the idea that divine is in the form of the ultimate light. So one day, Yajnavalkya, the greatest philosopher of those times, he visits his friend, who is a king, King Janaka. King Janaka is an important figure in Hindu mythology, but we can prove because there are many historical records that show that he was not a mythological figure, he's a historical person. He was the king of a country called Mithila in today's Bihar state, which is the capital of his empire, Mithila, the name of the kingdom at that time. And one day Yajnavalkya, his friend, who is a philosopher and sage, visits him in the court. In those days, there used to be long dialogues and interactions between philosophers in the assemblies of kings and emperors. And many of them were great women. Gargi was perhaps one of the greatest philosophers of those times. Now, one day when Yajnavalkya, the great philosopher, visited the king asked one question. Yajnavalkya, kim jyotirayam purusha iti? This question means, Yajnavalkya is the name of the philosopher. What is the light that enables people to go about doing different things? It's a simple question, obviously a simple question. There are 5 questions. The 5th question is the subject of discussion, and a great philosopher like Shankaracharya has written long commentaries on this. The first 4 questions are very simple, but when we understand the 5th question and what leads to the 5th question, we can see the grandeur of this discussion. So the first question is, Kim Jyotirayam Purushaidi, means what is the light which helps a person to move about, to walk about, to do the work and so on. Aditya Jyotiriti Samrat Diuvacha. So, simple question, what light is helping you in your everyday life to move about, to travel, to do your things? Okay. So, Adityena evayam jyodishaste pallede karma guride vivilyadedi evameva etat Yajnavalkya. Listen, okay Yajnavalkya, you are right. Then next question, that is also very simple. Suppose the sun has set in the west. What light helps you to do different things? Question is, in those days, there was no other force, moonlight. So, Astamide Yaditya Yajnavalkya Kim Jyotireva Ayam Purushayidi. Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Kim Jyotihi Eva Ayam Purushayidi. It's a simple splitting the words, Padacheda. So Yajnavalkya said, well, it is moonlight. And then the third question, Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamide Kim Jyotireva Ayam Purushayidi. Suppose the sun has set in the west, there is no moonlight, then what is the light? So here light doesn't mean the light that you see in front of you. Light means, what are the characteristics of light? Light can reveal itself and light can reveal all of you. So it's an important thing. The function of light is, light is self-revealer and light also is the revealer of other things. When you have a light, you can see everything in the room and the light self-reveals itself. You don't need another light to see that there is a light here. You don't need, suppose you have light is burning, you don't need another light. So light reveals itself and light reveals everything else. So finally, the answer is Atma is the real light. Anyway, there is another question. Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamide Shante. No. Of course, before there is another question. Of course, that I left it. Means another question. Suppose there is no sunlight, no moonlight, and then what light will you do? You may perhaps fire a matchstick, something you may use. That's what helps you to reveal things. There is no sunlight, no moonlight. You may start a fire. You may have maybe a flame or something. So that is called Agni. Then the next fourth question. Suppose there is no sunlight, no moonlight, and no Agni, no fire. Then what is that by which you know about things? You may hear. Suppose you can't see because there is no sunlight, no moonlight, no matchstick, no flashlight. What will you do? If a car is moving the street of total darkness, then also your mind and your ears combine together and we can reveal to you that there is a car moving the street by hearing. So sound or speech is the fourth light. So Astamidi Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamidi Shanti Akno Kinjodrivayam Purushayidi Vageva. Vag means speech. This continues, the discussion continues. Astamidi Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamidi Shanti Akno Shantayam Vachi Kinjodrivayam Purushayidi. I'm just reading out this. So those who are interested, you can read these mantras in the 4th chapter, 3rd Brahmana, the beginning you can read for yourself. It's interesting discussion. The succeeding discussion is very relevant. These questions are very simple. The 4th question is, suppose you can't see anything because there is no sunlight, no moonlight, and suppose you can't hear anything, and there is no flame or anything. So no sunlight, no moonlight, no flashlight or matchstick or let's say wicks, and you can't hear. Suppose a person is deaf. How he will understand things? Actually, such a person will start thinking, and he will be thinking in his mind about things that he had experienced in the past. Still, that's why, even when you can't hear anything, there is no light or anything, still you can sit somewhere and think of your past experiences. There is somebody within all of us which accumulates, stores up all memories, all emotions, all thoughts from the past and replays all this in our mind. That is the Atman. If the Atman is not there, then you may have wonderful ears, you can't hear anything. You may have wonderful eyes, and sunlight is there, you can't see anything. Or moonlight is there, you can't see anything. So there is one divine spark that is present in all of us. That is called Jyotisham Jyoti, the light of all lights. The Atman or Atma Jyoti, that's a real light. All other objects get light, the borrowed light. If the Atman is not within us, there are many people who die very healthy, their ears are okay, eyes are okay, they could speak, but still when somebody or something leaves that body cannot see, cannot hear, cannot talk, because all these faculties borrowed their ability to function from this light of Atman. That is called Jyotisham Jyoti, the light of all lights. So, in the 17th verse, Lord Krishna says, Jyotisham api tat Jyoti. So, the highest Jyoti is the light that reveals everything, that reveals itself. Now, remember, Jyoti Brahmanam is one of the most celebrated discussions. In fact, those who are in Western countries, if you read Hume, Max Muller, or Paul Deussens, or Schopenhauer, what they wrote about this important subject, you can see is one of the most profound statements, description of the absolute reality which is beyond description. An attempt to explain what is beyond explanation. Because there is one light that is present within all of us. That's why the word light is often associated with anything that is celestial and divine in all traditions. The light is something that reveals darkness. So if there is something that runs away in front of light, it is darkness. So then Lord Krishna says here, when a person reaches that level of spiritual evolution, he begins to experience the presence of this light of all light within him. And then he can see the same light in all beings, and he will experience his identity and oneness, the whole creation. That's the highest state of spiritual experience. All prayers, meditations, and spiritual religious practices are different tools and different means to eventually realize the presence of the divine in the form of the light of all lights in our own hearts. So we will have interaction now, and you are most welcome. We'll continue the discussion in the next session. Most welcome. Yeah.
Swamiji, there's a YouTube question.
Yeah. In verse 12, what is meant by the neither Sat nor Asat? So I shall explain that. Okay. So that is a well-known. Actually, it explains the essence of Advaita. You know, Nyayam yet tat pravakshyami yet jnatva amrutamasnuti. Anadimat param brahma na sat tat na asat uchyate. So I'm going to explain to you that ultimate truth, which is to be known, the highest truth to be known. And by realizing that ultimate truth, that we call Brahmajnanam, you will realize your own immortality, because when we identify ourselves with what is immortal and eternal, then we will attain immortality, because our true nature is not this perishable body-mind complex, but the imperishable Atman that is within this body-mind complex. That's why it is called Sharirendriya Vyatiriktam. It is distinct and different from the body-mind complex. Now, Anadimat Param Brahma. It is Anadi because it is no beginning and therefore no end. It is Anadi, it always existed. So it cannot have a beginning. Something can have a beginning only if it is not eternal. Atman or Brahman is eternal. Therefore, it can never have a beginning, and also it cannot have an end. The next important point is na sat na tat na asat uchyade. It cannot be called sat, and it cannot be called asat. Now, sat and asat, these are two different words. What is existing, it called sat. What is not existing is called asat. Normally, when we call something that is existing, at the empirical level, we mean something that comes into existence. So it is existing. A pot comes into existence. When the pot maker makes a pot, or a mechanic makes a machine, so the machine has come into existence. It is called Sat, the empirical sense, in the ordinary sense, not in the higher philosophical sense. So Atman cannot be called as Sat in the sense it comes into existence, like a pot or a machine comes into existence, because there was never a time when the Atman did not exist. So it cannot come into existence. Why it cannot come into existence? It is beyond the state of coming into existence. Like for birth is called ajam, is unborn. It doesn't mean that it is non-existing. It means it cannot be called something that comes into existence. When you say it comes into existence, you imply that there was a time when it did not exist. But Atman is eternal. Brahman is eternal. There was never a time when Atman did not exist. Therefore, Atman is Anadi, and also it cannot be called Sat. Atman cannot be called Sat because Atman always exists. Again, Atman cannot be called Asat, non-existent. Atman is existing all the time. So Atman cannot be called non-existent because Atman is always existing. There cannot be a time when Atman or Brahman doesn't exist. So it cannot be called Asat. Asat means non-existent. At the same time, Atman cannot be called existent because normally when you say it is existing, it means it can imply that from a state of non-existence, it came to a state of existence. Like a pot comes into existence when a pot maker makes a pot. Before that, it did not exist. So Atman is not like that. It always exists. So Atman cannot be called even existent because in the empirical sense, existence implies a state when it did not exist. Atman is always existing. It cannot be called Asat, means non-existent. Atman is always existing. So that's it. It is beyond existence, non-existence equation. It transcends both. That's the idea behind. I think it will be clear. So, okay, now like Nagarjuna's view upon truth of as a no view, including concept of knowledge. Okay, Nagarjuna, of course, the question is not very clear. Like Nagarjuna's view upon truth of as no view. Okay, Nagarjuna was a great Madhyamika philosopher belonging to the idealistic school of Buddhism. It's Mahayana Buddhism. Buddhism developed two main streams, Mahayana and Hinayana. In Hinayana Buddhism, there was Sautrantika and Vaibhashika realistic schools. In the Mahayana, there was this Shunyavada and Vijnanavada, which are idealistic schools. Nagarjuna, in his Madhyamika Karika, Mula Madhyama Shastra, and there was Sanskrit work, in that book, he declared the highest reality Shunyam. So, Nagarjuna Shunya is totally different from Brahman or Atmana Vedanta. Nagarjuna says the Shunyam it implies something which cannot be called as existing, but the term that he used led to a lot of misunderstandings. So you find a lot of Vedantic philosophers contradicted, refuted Nagarjuna's view, but he called it Shunyam. And Shunyam means the great nothingness, emptiness. So it is not emptiness, not at all. Shunyam is emptiness or nothingness. Vedanta says the whole creation emerged from Brahman, but not Parinama, but Vivarta. It appears to have become, the world appears to have come from Brahman. That's the idea behind. Like so many threads coming together appear to have become a cloth. But actually a cloth is nothing but threads manifesting in a different manner. You take all the threads, there will be no cloth. You take all the gold from a golden ornament, there is no ornament. So God itself appears to have become something other than gold when it becomes a nama and rupa, name and form. So it is vivarta. But Nagarjuna, he refused anything that can have an absolute existence. So he called it Shunya. Shunya, actually the inexplicable. Many of the terms that are used in Advaita philosophy are used by Nagarjuna, but finally he says it is one ultimate supreme nothingness, the ultimate supreme emptiness from which the world has come. So there is a great difference between these two views. Please understand. Okay, thank you.
Namaskar.
Yeah.
One thing I'm trying to understand about Brahman is when we're thinking about light,
Yeah.
and So the light exists sort of specially in our hearts, but also it pervades all. So if I'm talking about this chair here, does it pervade the chair the same way that it pervades my heart? Or is it that I'm perceiving this chair, but actually it's the light of Brahman shining through me at the chair?
You know, this light metaphor is used with only one emphasis. One aspect of Brahman is the presence of Atman, Brahman within us. It helps us to understand many things. It helps us to many things get revealed. When we see things, there is the presence of Atman within us. When we hear, when we touch, when we smell, when we taste, all the five senses of perception and mind, they function together because of the presence of Atman within us. So, but remember, our eyes can only reveal the presence of visual object. Okay, so the eyes doesn't reveal itself. Eyes can reveal the presence of visual objects when there is something within all of us which is other than the eyes. Otherwise, you know, the physical organism of eyes may not be enough. There are people who die, the eyes are perfectly okay. That's why they take the eyes out of the body, and those eyes are even donated. You know why? The eyes are okay. Then what prevented them to see things? You say they are died. But what does that mean? Vedanta says that invisible divine spark withdraws itself from that body mechanism. Okay. And then your ability to see is cancelled, gone. Your ability to hear is gone. So the metaphor of light is used only in this sense. Atman can reveal other things, it also reveals itself. Shankaracharya's commentary is very long. Atman can reveal other things because the presence of Atman within you that helped you to see things. So things got revealed to you. The car in front of you, the chairs which are moving, the vehicles are moving in the streets because you hear the vehicles. The chair on which you are touching, the book you are touching with your hands, you feel the presence of the book in your hands because the sense of touch and mind, with the help of Atman, you are able to see, feel the presence of book, cars, everything else. So Atman self-reveals and Atman reveals other things. This is an important thing. Without the Atman, nothing can be revealed. So all the revealing power of the senses and mind is borrowed from Atman. That's why I told you, there are people whose ears are okay, but somebody leaves the body. Who is that? Vedanta says it is the divine. You cannot say that it withdraws itself with that mechanism. There may be some reason for its withdrawal, but once it withdraws, the death is compared to the withdrawal of an unseen divine spark in the body mechanism. And then the body cannot use its eyes or anything, ears or anything. So the metaphor of light is only in this sense. Atman reveals itself and Atman can reveal other things. That's the idea. It's the only supreme revealer. In his presence, when Atman is present in you, then sunlight can reveal things because you have eyes and sunlight. Moonlight can reveal things. Your speech mechanism also can reveal things. You can hear. But when that Jyotisham Jyoti, the light of all lights are gone, other lights will not function. Sunlight will not function. Moonlight will not function. Electric light also will not function. Who is the real light? The Atma Jyoti. That's called Atma Jyoti. This is an important thing. It's a very important discussion. You can read the text, and anytime you are most welcome to ask this question. You remember Brihadaranyaka Upanishad? It is the 4th chapter, 3rd Brahmana, from beginning onwards, you can read, is a very supreme poetry actually, you know. Just imagine the divine is compared to the inner light present in all of us. That's the idea behind. Okay. So thank you for the question. If there are no more questions, most welcome. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.